What's up everybody, I'm Ryan from Minus the Gym and I'm really excited to be making this video because I'm super passionate about nutrition and I've had a lot of people asking in the comments for more nutritional videos. Specifically, they've been asking, how do I get enough protein when I eat a plant-based diet? So in this video, I'll show you 10 of my go-to protein sources and how I combine them in meals to get enough protein. Let's start things off with one of my favorite sources, legumes, also known as beans. If you're cooking your beans from raw, you want to soak them in a bowl of water overnight. Then put a colander in your sink, drain them, and then make sure you give them a good rinse. After the overnight soak, they'll have some residue left on there, so you're going to want to give them a good rinse just to get everything off so they're nice and clean. Then go ahead and simmer them for a good 40 to 60 minutes on the stovetop. I prefer about 40 to 45 minutes because I like my beans firmer instead of really soft. After you're done cooking them, put them back in the colander and give them a final rinse with cold water. This will stop them from cooking further and make them ready to eat. You can also eat beans from a can if you want, but then you're getting extra sodium, so I prefer cooking them. And just so you know, you get about 15 grams of protein per cup, depending on the bean. And the second source we're going to look at is quinoa. A lot of people are mistaken calling quinoa a grain, when it's actually not a whole grain, it's a seed. It cooks like a grain, and it even kind of tastes like one, so we call it a pseudo-grain. No need to soak quinoa before you cook, although you should probably rinse it in the sink before cooking it. And all you do is bring water to a boil, drop in the dry quinoa, and then let it simmer. It cooks a lot like rice, only taking about 20 minutes for all the water to evaporate, and you should use 2 parts water to 1 part quinoa. In the end, you'll see that the quinoa is no longer tiny seeds, but they've sort of sprouted and gotten fluffy in a way, and it delivers 8 grams of protein per cup. So I'm going to go ahead and take a cup of those beans we just made and add it to this quinoa. As we go through more protein sources, I'll start building on this and create a meal out of it. And that's a good segue to the third source I eat a lot, and that's a soy product called tempeh. That weird brick thing at the bottom, that's tempeh. It's basically a block of fermented soybeans. But don't be put off by that description. What you can do with tempeh is slice it up into cubes and then either marinate it in your favorite marinade, or you can spice it with some dried spices. Then bake it in the oven at 350 for about 30 minutes, flipping it halfway through. So I spiced mine with chili powder, cumin, and paprika, and after baking it, I put it around that quinoa and beans and then added some more veggies. I added diced tomato, corn, and black olives with some fresh cilantro on top. This in itself would be delicious, maybe with some salsa on top, but you know what? I'm going to make a sauce. And that calls for source number 4, which is nutritional yeast. We typically have a lot of nutritional yeast on hand, so we keep it in this giant jar. Basically, nutritional yeast is, well, yeast, meaning it's a fungus, specifically a deactivated yeast like brewer's yeast, what people use to make beer and wine. It's a great source of protein, vitamins, and minerals, and you can add it by the tablespoon to sauces, dressings, even sprinkle it on lasagna and things, because it adds a sort of buttery or cheesy flavor. So what I went ahead and did is use nutritional yeast to make a sauce. This is a cilantro tahini lime sauce. Here's the recipe in case you want to pause your screen and write it down, but it's basically cilantro tahini, nutritional yeast, some lime juice, and a garlic clove, and if you want some spice, a little bit of cayenne pepper. Blend it all in a blender, and then add a tablespoon of water, one at a time, until you reach the consistency you like for your sauce. I like my sauces to be pretty thick, so I didn't add too much water, and then I poured it over the plate of quinoa and beans and veggies and tempeh, and now that I think about it, this is a really high protein plate, but for the sake of example, I went ahead and made it. So real quick before we move on, let's take a look at the nutritional content of this plate, alright? This is Chronometer, some software that I use to look at nutrition. You can see I have everything, the quinoa, the beans, the raw tomato, the corn, black olives, nutritional yeast, all the sauce ingredients down here. So I have it all plugged in, and if we go down here to energy, you can see that total calories is 876. So that's a pretty big meal, all right? Not my biggest. I've eaten as much as 1,200 calories in a meal, no problem. But that's a pretty big plate. And if we look at the protein, we're up to 48.8 grams of protein in this one meal. That's quite a bit, right? Especially for plant-based. And if I hover over that, you can see the top three heavy hitters are black beans at 15 grams, the tempeh is at 11.3 grams, and quinoa at 8.1. So these plant-based foods can really add up in terms of protein. And while we're here, I want to go down to the vitamins here. You can see B12. I want to point out that this one meal gives me over 250% of my daily B12 requirement. All right, if I hover over that, you can see it's from the nutritional yeast. I just wanted to point that out, that a lot of these plant-based foods are fortified with B12, and although I do recommend taking a B12 supplement, you can see you'll still get that vitamin from other foods. Alright, now moving on to source number 5, SPELT. And you can see I love SPELT so much, I've started buying it in bulk. This is a 10-pound bag. SPELT is a whole grain, and it kind of looks like wheat berries when it's in its raw form. And on that topic, I do want to mention that this does have gluten in it, alright? So if you have celiac disease or a gluten intolerance, steer clear of SPELT because it has gluten. But like all whole grains, what you're going to want to do with this is make sure you put however much you want to cook into a bowl with water and soak it overnight, alright? That really helps with the cooking process. Then drain and rinse the next day, and go ahead and simmer it for about 60 minutes. The end result is a delicious whole grain that tastes kind of like farro, and I mix it with raw veggies and put some salt on it. It delivers 10 grams of protein per 1 cup cooked. And moving on to source number 6, hemp seeds. Hemp seeds are great if you eat a lot of salads or if you make smoothies because they pack a punch with the protein and they're easy to sprinkle in to different recipes. You can see there's 10 grams of protein in just 3 tablespoons. So when I'm making a smoothie like this green smoothie here, it's got bananas, grapes, spinach, some soy milk. I like using 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds in there to kick up the protein a little bit by 10 grams. This happens to be one of my post-workout smoothie recipes, so it's quite large, weighing in at about 32 ounces. It's close to 800 calories, and it delivers nearly 30 grams of protein, so it's one of my go-to recipes. And next up on the list is lentils, source number 7. Lentils to me are like miniature beans. That's how I feel about them. You don't need to soak them overnight like beans. You just rinse them and then go ahead and simmer for about 20 minutes on the stovetop. Drain them in a colander and then go ahead and serve them on some brown rice with some steamed veggies on top. Here I got broccoli, and this packs quite a punch. Lentils clock in at 18 grams of protein per cup, making this plate with the rice and broccoli a little over 32 grams of protein without sauce. And now peanut butter. This is source number 8. Even the peanut butter manufacturers boast the protein because it's 8 grams per serving. And when I say natural peanut butter, it's because it doesn't have any oil, alright, no refined fat, just peanuts and a little bit of salt. I put peanut butter on a lot of things, but one of my favorites is whole grain bread, source number 9 that I recommend. And here I have sprouted grain bread, which is also great. 100% whole grain or sprouted grain bread typically average about 4 grams of protein per slice. But then I spread a tablespoon of peanut butter on each slice with some sliced banana, and I drizzle some honey over it. The end result is 32 grams of protein in 4 open-faced peanut butter, banana, and honey sandwiches. And last but not least, unsweetened soy milk, source number 10 that I use quite often. And I'm not trying to push any brands here, I just want to show that it's 7 grams of protein per cup. Alright, that's 1 serving of soy milk. I like using it in my smoothies as a base. Now if I'm trying to lose weight, I'll use water, but when I'm trying to gain weight, I'll use the soy milk for extra protein. And I also like to accompany my sandwiches, specifically sweet stuff, like the peanut butter, banana, honey sandwiches, with a glass of soy milk as well. And that, my friends, is just 10 of the many examples of where I get my protein from.
So some of you might be wondering, why not just eat meat? You know, meat and poultry and fish and eggs, they're all high in protein. And I used to eat all that stuff, and in my mid-20s, I wound up with really high blood pressure. All right, it's a long story, but the short version is After multiple doctor's appointments and multiple blood pressure readings, they diagnosed stage 2 hypertension, just really high blood pressure, and prescribed me medication that I never ended up taking, right? Because I looked at the list of side effects and I was not too crazy about some of those side effects. So instead, I wound up researching nutrition because I felt that my blood pressure problem was related to nutrition, and that's how I found the plant-based diet. Specifically, I found this organization called the PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And what I learned from reading up on them is that medical doctors out there are using plant-based nutrition to reverse chronic degenerative diseases like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer. All that stuff is being treated with nutrition alone. So I started eating the diet, my blood pressure regulated, and here I am almost 8 years later, and I'm still eating a mostly plant-based diet. So if you're interested in learning more about plant-based nutrition and how to exercise at home and keep healthy, make sure you subscribe to my channel, minus the gym. I'll put a link right up here in the corner, and make sure you tap that bell when you subscribe. That way you're notified every time I upload a video.